Hi, everybody. Welcome to Behind the Scenes with Matt Potato Studios. Today, we'll be looking at our first production ever, Reasons to Live. We'll see how we got there, how we ended up with this film, what we learned from the production, and what we took to the next production. As I say, Reasons to Live was my very first fiction production, and I went into it completely blind. I learned a lot from it, but to be honest, it almost didn't happen. Let's discuss how we got to this point and see what we did wrong and what we did right. Going into this production, I didn't realize how many people on set it took to make a production happen. So actually, we only had 4 people on set. Those were our 2 principal actors, myself doing pretty much everything, and my wife helping out. Looking back, this was probably our first mistake because this made the whole production much more stressful than it had to be. I guess let's first talk about the story and how it came about. This was the very first script that we wrote for Matt Potato Studios. In fact, we've eventually refined our process of writing a few scripts and choosing the best one to produce. But this was actually the very first script that we wrote and recorded. So there was no process behind it. We just wrote it and we went with it. For me personally, writing the script, at the time I was dealing with loss, and I wanted to sort of explore that through visual themes and childhood innocence, hence the character of Joey that we'll discuss a bit later. But this was my attempt to put those feelings that I was having to paper and eventually to screen, and hopefully some of that came across, and I really hope that the film came out as genuine, and I hope that people enjoyed it. When writing the script, the things that came quite easily to me personally were the story building, the world building, background, character information, as well as the general dynamics of the story, writing setups, writing the points of no return, writing the climax. The thing that I struggled with a bit more was writing dialogue, and especially making each character sound distinct from each other, having their own voice. That's something that we've sort of refined going through our future scripts. But I hope that this first script at least made some attempt at making that aspect believable. So certainly one of the advantages that I had being a writer who knew that I would direct this film and produce it into a screen format was the ability to include or exclude things that were difficult to get and include things that were easy to get or I knew I had. A great example of this is the kite that is being used in the film. I had an idea of some sort of toy being meaningful to both the characters in the film, and I just so happened to have a kite lying around that was given to me by my wife, and I thought, why not? Let's use this. So we wrote it into the script and we eventually used it for the film. I always say use what you have, whether it's props, items, people, friends. When you're in this business, you really have to use all the tricks up your sleeves to make these things happen. Knowing that I would direct this film and produce it, even from the very start of the script, I approached it as a director. I didn't think about how a writer would write this. I just wrote what I wanted to see on the screen. It was a lot easier for me to produce the film knowing what I wanted it to look like. More than that, I knew that we would be able to get a location like this and characters like these and props like these to work for our script because I had thought of these things before writing. I think if I had given the script to somebody to read, they would not have understood what it meant or what it was supposed to look like. This was really just for me as a reference for the film that you eventually saw. So once we had the script ready, the next most important thing we had to do was get the location that we were going to film in. Even though there's a lot of charity shops around where we're based, and even though they're open and visually they're quite suitable for the film, I didn't realize how few of them were able to help us. And out of the ones that were, how expensive it was to rent the place for shooting. The bigger charities, often with big bureaucratic systems, had to go to their bosses and their bosses' bosses and their bosses' bosses' bosses. And we'd eventually hear a no a few weeks later. And the smaller charities, even the ones that were willing to help, I didn't realize how expensive they would be. And the price they quoted was way beyond our means. We were actually about to give up on the script because I thought it's impossible to find a charity where we could do this. And at the last minute, one of the charities that I reached out at the very beginning because I really liked the look of it, came back to us. And we managed to negotiate a price that suited both of us. It was quite expensive, but I think in the end it was worth it. We had to tell them that this was a no budget production. We had no people attached. This was our very first production. We had to negotiate with them the price that was worth their day, but also affordable to us. What I particularly liked about the place that we actually ended up going with was the sort of abundance of stuff they had and the sort of claustrophobic feeling that it gave to the character. It really worked with our character, Mr. McGinnis, being sort of closeted in his own world and barricading himself from the world. And I think that sort of feeling really permeated throughout the shots and the scenes, being sort of full with stuff, as you can see in the film. Once we had our location secured, the next thing to do was to cast the actors. And writing the script, I already knew exactly who I wanted to work with. So instead of holding a casting audition, I just approached the two people and asked if they wanted to be in the film. Thankfully, they both said yes. One thing I didn't realize when I got both of these people signed up was that neither of them had done a film before. So they didn't really have any idea of how to behave in front of a camera and what you could or couldn't do. So that was another big challenge. Not sure if I needed any more stress for this production, but this was also my first time working with a child actor. And you know how in movies they say don't work with children or pets? Well, there's some truth to that saying, and it does make shooting just a little bit more stressful than it has to be. Thankfully for me, working with Joey was a blast. He was incredibly talented, and even though it was his first time on camera, he picked up cues super quick and just was a pleasure to work with. But one of the details that you've probably already seen is the eye lines in the shots and how sometimes they just don't add up. I guess that's one of the details of working with non-film actors. I tried my best on set to make it look like they're looking at each other in the shots, but in the end, the little bits had to be fixed in the editing room. I'm not sure if we ended up making something that looks believable, but hopefully nobody mentioned this and nobody saw this, so this is just for me. Working with the character of Mr. McGinnis was fantastic. This was an actor who's based primarily in radio, as you can hear from his voice. He has an amazing booming voice, and that really brought another level to the production. But one of the challenges that I had with him from the beginning was that he was very keen to use his voice for performance, but not much else. So we really had to get his whole body involved in the performance, in the production. It took us a few takes, but I think in the end we sort of got there. As a director, I really had to think of creative ways of how to get him out of his head and be present in the scene. Okay, so let's jump right into the film and see what we came up with. So probably the first thing you'll notice from the first shot of the film is the title of the charity shop, Rose Petal Charity Shop. It probably looks a little bit amateurish. I wasn't sure whether we're allowed to legally include the name of the charity shop that we were filming in, whether we needed special release forms, and we certainly didn't have the budget to make VFX for this one board, so this is what I sketched up. Hopefully it's not too detracting from the film. As you can see there in the box is the kite that I mentioned at the beginning. That's the kite that my wife gave to me and we decided to use in this production. This film is very much DIY. From the shot you can see that I simply printed this sticker and stuck it to the window. I guess it makes sense to the world because this is what they would have probably done in the charity shop anyway, but this is sort of a poster that I've added to the location to make it feel more real. Thankfully, the location already looked a lot like what we had in mind, so we didn't have to change a lot of anything. One thing that we struggled with in this entire production was this front door. Because it was only 4 of us on set, there was nobody helping us to notify people of the general public that there was filming happening. So throughout the whole day, people kept coming in and asking if they were open, which of course interrupted a lot of our shots and we had to redo those. Eventually we decided to finish all the shots by the door first, lock it, and then move everything inside. That sort of worked, but we still had people bang on the door sometimes asking to be let in so they could shop in this charity shop. Certainly next time I would put a sign or something on the wall saying there's filming inside. As we already discussed previously with the eye lines, you can certainly see this in one-ers or shots that have only one character. It's unclear where people are looking exactly, so we had to sort of work with this in the edit room. We didn't have many takes to choose from, but we sort of tried to do the best with what we had. Something that I didn't account for was the lens that I chose to shoot this film in. I really liked the look of it, but I didn't realize how zoomed in everything became. So it was a struggle to really fit everything, all the characters in shot with the space that we had in the location. And given the size difference between our two actors, I had to either pick between Mr. McGinnis or Joey. As the story is framed from Joey's perspective, seeing Mr. McGinnis without his head sort of elevated him to the status of an entity to be feared. So with a quick decision, that's what we went with. Cut off Mr. McGinnis' head in shots where they were both in frame. In the end, looking back, I really think this choice works. But going forward, I would certainly recommend testing your kit on the location you're filming in before you go in and film.
So you don't have any model cars for sale? They're quite popular now.
This shot is a shot that we're quite proud of, actually. And that's because it's the first, possibly only shot in this film, in our first film, that has background and foreground happening at the same time. We sort of framed Mr. McGinnis to be picking the books here to give that depth of field. And it really added another layer to the film. Again, this was something that was made more difficult with the lens choice, as we didn't have much room to maneuver. But in the end, I really like this shot.
I can sell to you.
This composition was another one that really stood out to me in the editing room. I really liked how the central sort of clothes hanger area divides the two characters and divides their worlds. And we can see both of them doing their actions in the same shot. So I was really happy with this shot. The sequence was actually really funny because the whole purpose was to make Joey drop a piece of porcelain and smash it on the ground, which was supposed to force Mr. McGinnis to take Joey's toys as payback. We filmed this maybe 3-4 times, and the porcelain piece just refused to break. I don't know if you can notice from the wide where it falls on the floor, but the piece never actually breaks. Just the lid falls off and it rolls away. Thankfully, both of the characters stayed in their zone and didn't break character, so we were able to sort of cheat this moment. A big thing that I had no understanding going into this film was lighting, specifically lighting the scenes. And you will see from many scenes that the lighting is different and it changes. What I did was I managed to borrow a few LED stands from a friend. And because I had no more hands, I just sort of set them up in various locations on set and kept them throughout the day, no matter how far or close the shot was. So throughout the piece, you will see that the sort of lighting shifts and it becomes a little different. The idea was to simulate the outside light with a cold light, as you can see, for example, from this shot. But I think it's a little too cold, and this is a problem that I had in the editing room, trying to match the colors a little bit. Here again, you can see that he's lit from the back and it's the same color. It's supposed to give that look of outside light, but I'm not sure if it's doing a good job. I don't know if you can notice from the shot, but we've placed a photo of Mr. McGinnis with his cousin, which will be used towards the end of the film for the climactic part. We didn't have time to go out and make these photo shoots, so we used a real-life photo. Thankfully, the actor was kind enough to provide this photo. Again, coming back to this shot, working with Joey, he kept spiking the camera every so often, and if you repeatedly watch this scene, you will see him looking at the camera a few times. We tried to tell him to not look directly at the camera, but I think he was just looking for approval that he was doing a great job, which he was, and I think we used the best take that we had. Hopefully it's not too distracting from the film. One good thing about working in the charity shop as our location was that all the toys that we used for the shoot were actually from the charity shop. So we just took them off the shelves and stuck them in the box for Joey to use. Again, you always have to use whatever is available to you when making films. I think we pushed this to the limit in this shoot. One more issue that I personally faced in this production was recording the sound. Because I wasn't able to do the lights, record the sound, do the camera work, and everything in between, I had to just set up the mics on the characters and hope for the best. So even if they fell off halfway through the shoot, which thankfully didn't happen, we would have had to roll with it. I had an additional boom mic on top of the camera to mitigate that if that happened. But you can probably hear from the edit that a lot of the audio has audio enhancement, which doesn't sound great, but a lot of the audio was a bit distant, a bit not tuned up to the right level, so we had to enhance it. It doesn't sound great, but I think it's the best that we could do with this setup. Again, going forward, this would certainly be the next thing for us to invest in, a sound person and a dedicated person to deal with audio recording. This bit is supposed to be the big climactic bit, the big action sequence when Joey decides to take the money and steal from the shopkeeper to have the money for his parents. And the way that I try to frame this is to have as many shots as possible, to have a quick succession of cuts, to make the action seem faster. What I didn't realize was that actually having quick cutaways, sort of away from the action, decreased the tension and decreased the speed of and the energy of the piece. So if I was to do this piece again, I would certainly focus on their reactions more and have more shots of them reacting to the action. I think in that way we sort of would be able to make it faster and more dramatic. It doesn't particularly matter where the money falls on the floor. I think what people want to see is the reaction of the characters. And this is the point where the photo sort of becomes the central piece. I tried to set it up in a few previous shots so it doesn't just come out of the blue and it doesn't seem forced. Hopefully the audience would have noticed it and paid more attention to it in the previous shots so they would feel like this is earned. Possibly something that would have helped was keeping the shot in focus and better framed in the previous shots. But again, that's for the audience to let me know if it worked or it didn't work. And the voice call here, the voice that you hear is the voice of my wife, who was kind enough to help me out record it. I certainly didn't have enough money to pay for another voice actor, so I just decided to record her at the house and use it for the movie. Now, the name of the dog was a bit of a inside joke for myself. You always have to make things funny for yourself when creating these things because it is so stressful. But I decided to call the dog Monosket, having a Trisket and a Biscuit and a Monosket. I don't know if it was funny to the audience or the actors or if anybody got that, but it was funny to me and it made my day a little bit easier. You can probably notice from this section that the actions already don't quite add up. That's because towards the end of the day we were running out of time and we really only had a little bit of time for each sequence. Maybe 2 shots or 3 shots at max. So I wasn't really able to capture the same sort of movements from the actors from shot to shot. I had to use what was available to me. And hopefully this is not too noticeable. I know that certain directors don't mind action continuity as long as the performance is good. But it was quite important for me for this shot. And unfortunately I didn't get it in the end. One big tip that many filmmakers have probably heard before: if you don't have a lot of time and you don't have a big budget, just remove any surface that is reflective. As you can see from Mr. McGinnis's glasses, he's reflecting the LED light that we have set up in the space, which is not great. Now we sort of come to the big emotional payoff of the scene. And it was really important to me, as I mentioned, to get Mr. McGinnis fully in the character, away from his acting voice and fully in his body. I tried a few directing methods to sort of try to get him there. I'm not sure if his performance was believable at the very end, but I think he definitely did much better than when we started. In the shot again, we come back to the issues presented by the lens choices. I really wanted to make a straight-on shot for both characters so they can just look directly at the camera, but the spacing didn't allow for it. So this was the best alternative that we could come up with. Towards the end of the film, we have the sequence that should kind of insinuate that Joey is perhaps trying to steal money again, which at the end reveals that he's actually returning money. So it's supposed to be sort of a reveal. I'm not sure if it quite worked out that way, but that was the idea behind it. Finally going to the very end of the film, the very last emotional climax and sort of the 2 characters agreeing to work together and Mr. McGinnis agreeing to give Joey a task to give him life in the context of the story. I'm not sure if it came across to the audience, but the premise of the film was that Joey thought that he was running out of time because the dog that he was taking care of had died and he had no more purpose. So by Mr. McGinnis agreeing to give him a task, he essentially extends his life, gives him a reason to live, and hence the title of the film. We have this big emotional scene at the end, which sort of captures that idea of the film. And I was really quite proud of both the actors for being able to get to that place, to really land that bit. And that's how we wrapped the film. Looking back on the whole production, I really learned quite a lot on this film. I went into it not knowing very much about how to do fiction at all. As I said, there was barely any people on set in terms of crew, but we managed to make it happen, and I'm really proud of everybody who was involved in this production. Certainly the biggest lessons that I learned from this was the more time you can spend in pre-production, the smoother your production process will work. Specifically, I would have spent a bit more time setting up the audio, adjusting the levels, making sure all of that is crystal clear, and perhaps even getting somebody to listen into it to make sure that it's all working well. If budget allows, I would certainly also get a lighting person, either somebody who knows lights, how to set them up, or just somebody who's able to adjust the light as we move through the scene. We were shooting on gimbal, so this was a bit more important that the lights were sort of moving with us to keep a static look of the shot. I guess if you're more constrained by budget, another option is to keep every shot static on a tripod, and then in that way you can sort of preset all your lights before you start shooting. Finally, one more thing that we started doing right after this production is having rehearsals. We went into this shoot only having the characters met before and never really practiced anything. So it took us quite a while on set before we actually shot the first shot. We wasted almost 2 hours of potential screen time. Now, certainly advice for anybody who's just starting out, first-time directors, is just really go for it. You're gonna learn so much more from directing your own film than you can imagine, and it only gets better from there. Having said all of that, I'm still incredibly proud of this film that we produced, especially since this was our very first production. I think it lands really well, and I know there's some things to iron out, and perhaps is not as professional as it could have been, but we made something that's memorable to us and hopefully the audience. Thank you. This has been Mad Potato Studios. Okay, great. Cut.
Supposed to be on the top. I also forgot my line.